Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into a massive historical mystery, like one that's literally going to reframe everything you thought you knew about one of history's most famous figures. For over 2.5 millennia, right? The image of Siddhartha Gautama has been totally wrapped up in these serene statues, mystical detachment, and this whole pursuit of escaping the cycle of rebirth. But what if we've gotten him completely wrong? Seriously, what if his real discovery wasn't religious or metaphysical at all? What if it was actually a groundbreaking scientific observation about human behavior that we've just misunderstood for 2,000 years? Get ready, because what we're unpacking today is absolutely going to challenge centuries of assumptions. Okay, so to start unraveling this, we've got to address a pretty glaring paradox. Historical texts actually show us that the Buddha was definitely not immune to physical suffering. I mean, he suffered from a severe illness, most likely dysentery later in his life. He even survived an assassination attempt. His cousin, Devadatta, literally rolled a massive boulder at him, and a sharp shard struck his foot. You can imagine that caused immense pain. So this sets up a super fascinating question for us. If the enlightened Buddha couldn't avoid physical pain, or, just the daily realities of having a fragile human body, what exactly was the suffering he claimed to have cured? He clearly wasn't promising some magical shield against sickness or injury. So what was the actual cure he was offering? Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the Buddha you don't know, then look at A Tale of Two Buddhas, decode the science of moral corruption, move on to rediscovering the lost truth, and finally wrap up with building a new foundation. It's going to be a thrilling ride. All right, part one, the Buddha you don't know, a behavioral scientist, not a mystic. So when Siddhartha Gautama looked around at a society, he didn't just see individual people hurting. He saw a whole system that was functioning like a sick, dying body. But here's the kicker. He realized nature itself wasn't broken. Human behavior was. He wasn't some mystic trying to transcend humanity or, float away on a cloud. He was acting much more like a behavioral scientist, trying to rescue a society that was suffering from an internal moral disorder. Initially, he tried what all the other spiritual seekers of his day were doing: extreme asceticism, fasting, intense yogic disciplines. But he really quickly figured out that those practices only suppressed impulses temporarily. And honestly, they were totally inaccessible to normal, everyday people. So he established this incredibly rigorous standard. If it cannot help all, it is not the truth. A real solution had to work practically. It had to work for a busy mother, a working farmer, a merchant, and a ruler. If you had to run away and hide in a cave to find peace, well, it just wasn't a universal cure. This actually brings us to a fascinating breakthrough. The ancient texts point to a specific memory from his childhood. As a young toddler, Siddhartha was left under a tree during a royal ceremony. As the day went on, the sun moved, the shade disappeared, and he was left just sitting there in the sweltering heat. Yet when his caretakers finally rushed back, he wasn't crying, he wasn't angry. He was perfectly calm. Later in life, when reflecting on this, he realized something incredibly profound. Human minds are born essentially uncorrupted. Adults struggle with greed and anger because, well, they've built a habit out of it over years. But a toddler hasn't committed those repeated actions yet. He realized that the human mind becomes warped over time by repeated, harmful actions. Okay, let's dive into part two. A Tale of Two Buddhas, humanist healer versus nihilist escapist. Because of how history actually unfolded, we're now faced with this massive cognitive dissonance. There are essentially two completely conflicting versions of the Buddha that exist in our popular imagination today, and they are totally at odds with each other. On one hand, we have the first Buddha, the one described in the original source texts. This guy was a revolutionary humanist. He saw that poverty, injustice, and bullying weren't natural or just the will of the gods. They were man-made corruptions of the mind. He wanted to cure this moral illness so humanity could thrive, right here, right now. But then, on the other hand, we have the second Buddha. This is the one most people know today, and this version acts a lot more like a spiritual undertaker, offering this cosmic escape hatch. In this nihilist view, life itself is basically a trap, and the ultimate goal is to detach completely and just wait for death so you can finally escape the cycle of rebirth. So, one wants to fix the world, while the other just wants to abandon it. Moving right along to Section 3, the science of moral corruption, decoding karma and samsara. Now, if that first Buddha was right, then we need to completely rethink terms like karma and samsara. The source material argues that he absolutely did not view karma as some kind of magical cosmic punishment, but strictly through the lens of early behavioral neuroscience. And what's really wild is how this completely redefines samsara. It's not literal reincarnation into different bodies across multiple lifetimes. No, it is this exact mental loop of self-corruption. Let's break it down. Step 1. You commit a harmful action, say lying to or exploiting someone. Step 2. That action corrupts your mind. You literally train your brain to operate from a place of deceit. Step 3. Your perception alters. You start seeing the whole world as a hostile place where everyone lies. And finally, step 4, you feel a compulsion to repeat that harmful action just to survive in this hostile world you've now perceived. That is the wheel of samsara. It's your own default operating system becoming continuously corrupted by your own actions. The text uses a brilliant analogy for this evil acts, are basically like junk food. I mean, they taste sweet in the short term, right? Lying or cheating gives you an immediate rush, a quick reward, or an easy way out of a tough spot. But just like junk food, they eventually rot the system. This perfectly explains why religious dogma, simply telling people don't do evil or you'll go to hell, fails so often. The immediate pleasure is just way too tempting. But when you actually understand this observable behavioral cause and effect, when you realize that you are literally breaking your own mind's ability to be happy and peaceful every single time you act poorly, well, it provides a true logical cure for harmful behavior. Which brings us to Section 4, Rediscovering the Lost Truth, a 2,000-year-old error. So you're probably wondering, if this incredible secular behavioral science was so effective, how on earth did it get lost to mysticism and mythology? How did we get from the first Buddha to the second Buddha? Let's walk through the timeline of this massive doctrinal error. Around 500 BCE, we have the original practical discovery. Beautiful. But fast forward to the 3rd century BCE, and a text called the Kathavahu is written. This was basically used as a doctrinal weapon to settle disputes among different monastic factions. Then, jumping to the 4th and 5th century CE, a scholar named Buddhaghosa writes the Visuddhimagga, which heavily relied on those earlier deviations. Over centuries, these texts layered speculative philosophy and metaphysical mythology right over the top of the original teachings. They essentially took a practical, observable science of the mind and turned it into a state-sanctioned, rigid religious orthodoxy. But thankfully, the truth wasn't lost forever. The source details an amazing modern rediscovery by an 87-year-old monk living quietly in a rubber forest in Myanmar. Decades ago, when he was just 25, he retreated to the forest fully intending to live in traditional solitude. But he accidentally decoded the original meaning of the ancient text simply by relentlessly following one of the Buddha's original instructions. He just asked why before every single action. Before eating, before moving an arm, he asked why. This relentless stripping away of unconscious, automatic habits gave him the clarity to literally read the ancient scriptures between the lines, allowing him to recognize the original behavioral science that had been hidden beneath the dogma all this time. And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. The Buddha himself actually gave 6 specific criteria to test if a teaching was his true Dhamma. Consider these 6 qualities for a second. It must be testable through personal experience. It must be immediate, yielding results here and now, not in some hypothetical future life. It must invite inquiry rather than demanding blind faith, and it must be easily understood by a sincere person. Now I want you to apply this to the 2 Buddhas we talked about. Which version makes more sense? The mythological anxiety about escaping a literal cycle of rebirths across lifetimes? Or the observable, immediate behavioral science of exactly how our daily actions shape our mental health right now? Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Building a New Foundation, the Path to Lokottara. So what does this 2,600-year-old rediscovery actually mean for us today? If we strip away the mythology and recognize this profound psychological tool, how can we practically apply it to our modern world? Well, the texts say the Buddha's ultimate goal was something called Lokottara, an enlightened society. He wasn't trying to build a new religion at all, he was trying to build a civilization. He created his community, the Sangha, not as a group of detached monks avoiding the world, but as a foundational movement to literally safeguard the reconstruction of civilization. It was meant to be a society guided by wisdom and ethical living, completely free from the human-made suffering of exploitation and greed. And to build this new foundation today, the source argues that we don't need everyone to go off and become a monk. We actually just need a global network of what they call co-travelers, consisting of maybe 0.1% of the population, just 0.1%. This network would be made up of everyday people, writers, scientists, artists, technologists, parents. They wouldn't be united by some rigid religious hierarchy or dogma, but rather by a shared clarity,
a deep personal understanding of this behavioral science. By simply living out this ethical clarity in their daily lives, they can gently illuminate their communities and serve as the rock-solid foundation for a highly productive, evil-free humanity.
We've covered a ton of ground today, looking at how a highly practical science of the human mind was transformed over time into a religion of escape, and how it's being powerfully rediscovered today. Ultimately, it all comes down to a choice of perspective. So as you process everything we've unpacked in this explainer, I'm going to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder. Which Buddha will you follow? The one who offers a practical path to heal the world right here and now, or the one who tells you to abandon it? Thank you so much for learning with us today, and we'll catch you next time.